Hello! This is a student presentation using a hypothetical scenario for educational purposes. I am from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. I am a student in the Environmental and Occupational Health class, and this is our final presentation. Hi, my name is Ashley Fischer, and I will be going over mercury exposure in Phillips County. I'm an environmental health specialist at the Arkansas Department of Health. So this is what we'll be talking about today. We're going to be going over what is mercury, why is it important, what are some sources of mercury exposure, why is it important for Phillips County, and how are we affected by it? What are the health effects and treatment of mercury, and how can we prevent it? Lastly, we'll be going over some policies regarding mercury in Arkansas. Let's go over what is mercury. So mercury is a natural element. It's found in the earth, on our rock, on our soil. It's also found in water, so any local water sources, rivers, oceans, creeks, rain. It's even found in the air. A fun fact about mercury is that it's the only metallic element that is liquid at room temperature. I've included a picture from the Ohio State University, which is where I got this information from, and it shows you how mercury looks. It's also known as quicksilver. You may have heard that term before. It exists in 3 different types of states, which are gas, liquid, and solid. Gas can also be known as vapor. And mercury is divided into 3 forms: elemental, inorganic, and organic. We'll go over that now. There are 3 forms of mercury. Let's go over the first one now. Elemental mercury can exist in 3 different states: metal, liquid, and gas. It's commonly found in thermometers. So if you have an old-timey thermometer, as the picture shown above, you may have seen that little bit of silver liquid inside of it. That's mercury. There's also dental fillings that have mercury. So if you've ever seen a person with a silver dental cap or just a filling that's silver, that's also mercury. But the main way we're exposed to elemental mercury is through inhalation. We breathe it in and it gets absorbed in our lungs. It's not good for us, but it happens. Second, we have inorganic mercury. This is a main product for industries, for pharmaceutical companies, for cosmetic companies, and even mining. It's found in a lot of soaps and a lot of beauty products, and it can be absorbed through our skin or if we accidentally digest it or take it in our mouth. Lastly, and most importantly, we have organic mercury. It's the main reservoir of how we are exposed to mercury. By that I mean we mainly eat it. It's mainly found in our fish that eat other fish. So like really, really big fish tend to have more mercury. It's also found in soil and rock or in any kind of pesticides, but our main exposure is through diet. There are a lot of important benefits to mercury. It's used by pharmaceutical companies to develop vaccines and medications, but it's used in a very, very low amount. So it's not actually going to be toxic to our body at that level. Like I said before, it's used in dental fillings, it's used in thermometers, and it can even be used to extract gold and silver in mining. But there are some risks to mercury, and in fact, I would argue more risks than benefits with mercury. Mercury is known as a top 10 chemical of major public health concern according to the World Health Organization in 2017. Reason being is that mercury is odorless and toxic, and you don't necessarily know when you've been exposed to mercury. So this is a way for us to go over, hey, how am I exposed to mercury and what can I do about it? So let's do that now. Here are some common sources of mercury exposure. Let's start with the number 1 reason we are exposed to mercury, which is fish, especially big fish. You see, predatory fish that eat smaller fish will have a larger amount of mercury within them because mercury builds up. So we need to avoid fish such as tuna or swordfish or gar. It's not only found in oceans. People think that it's only found in saltwater. It's also found in freshwater, and we'll go over that a little bit later. Mercury can also be in our soils. So, like I said earlier, mercury can be found in our water, in our earth, in rocks. It can be in runoff and produce acid rain. With that all said, mercury can be a problem for agriculture because leafy vegetables and fruits can actually be exposed to mercury. And even though it's not as near of an amount compared to fish, it's still there. Like I said earlier, mercury can be found in soaps and cosmetics. It can be found in batteries and fluorescent lamps. It can also be found in trash and waste. And we'll go over some ways that Arkansas is trying to reduce that. It can also be found in our jobs. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you're working at a manufacturing company that does any medical devices or paints or those lamps we were talking about earlier that have fluorescence in them, those are all places you can be exposed to mercury. Like I said earlier, it can be in mining industries. In the past, we actually used to mine mercury ore in Arkansas. So it makes sense that we need to be careful when it comes to mining. And lastly, we also have industry. By that I mean mercury is found in cement, it's also found in metals, so in general, any kind of manufacturing and industry can have a mercury exposure. So why should we, as residents of Phillips County, be concerned about mercury exposure? Well, it's in our hometown. Arkansas has a history of mining mercury, so we know for a fact that it's in our soil and in our water and in our air. Mercury has been found in the Mississippi River, which is right next door to us. A lot of us like to fish there and eat the fish from there. So fish that we should try to avoid are bigger fish, fish that eat smaller fish, such as bass, flathead catfish, gar, and so on. I would still suggest eating smaller fish. It's not that fish are bad for you, it's just that we want to reduce mercury exposure. So some smaller fish that you can try to eat are crappie, bream, channel catfish, buffalo, and so on. If you're ever concerned about which fish you can or shouldn't eat, I would check the guidelines on Arkansas Department of Health website. You can also look at the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission website. Let's go over why reducing mercury exposure is important for our health. So there are many health effects with mercury exposure. These can be short-term, which we will also call acute, and long-term, which we'll call chronic. So the reason it's so important to monitor mercury in our bodies is because mercury is a neurotoxin. By that, I mean it's a substance that can be absorbed in our brain and affect our daily functioning, the way we move, the way we think. So some short-term effects are memory loss, hearing, vision, and speech problems. We can have tremors. We can have a lack of coordination. By that, not just walking. We're also talking balance, writing, anything that uses coordination. You can also have skin issues. If you see a rash develop, that might be a sign of mercury exposure. You can even have trouble swallowing and chewing, which can lower our appetite. And in the long term, can give us weakness, fatigue, weight loss, which can make us anorexic. It can disturb our GI tract. So we might have diarrhea or constipation. But most importantly, like I said before, it's a neurotoxin, so it affects our overall nervous system and can deteriorate it. So we need to be careful about how much mercury we're allowing into our body. I didn't put this on the slide, but I would like to also mention expecting mothers also need to be wary of mercury exposure because mercury can be passed on to a fetus. And by that I mean, if you are an expecting mother and you eat fish that have mercury in them, that mercury can go to your baby. So you want to be mindful about how much fish you're eating, maybe even try to avoid eating fish while pregnant, because it can be damaging to the fetus. If you are exposed to mercury, don't be fully alarmed yet, okay? A lot of times our body can naturally get rid of mercury. But if you're exposed to a lot of mercury, there are some things we can do. So according to the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, our first response should be to stop the exposure. For example, if you accidentally break an old-timey thermometer and it's on your clothing, remove it. If you are eating a lot of fish that has mercury in it and you kind of think you may have mercury poisoning, stop eating that amount of fish. Your body will try to get rid of that mercury naturally. Number 2, if you're having some serious effects to mercury exposure, seek supportive care. By that I mean go to your doctor, and they can help you with things such as airway control. So if you're having any issues breathing, I would immediately go to the emergency department. If you have mercury on your skin, consider irrigating that skin with warm water for a long amount of time so you can decontaminate yourself. But if none of that is really working and you think you might have a chronic or a long-term exposure to mercury, I would suggest going to your doctor and getting a urine test for 24 hours. Yes, it might not be fun to have to take your urine for 24 hours. I know that's a long time, but it's important because if you have a certain amount of mercury in your body, it will actually give you a medicine that will help remove that toxic metal. And by that, it'll just help it go through the urine. It's just like an extra benefit. So you might be saying, Ashley, I'm not having current health issues with mercury, but I don't want to risk it. Well, that's great. There's some things we can do to reduce mercury exposure. So number one thing is some clean energy practices in our home. You can go to Walmart and get some nice clean bulbs and replace any fluorescent lamps or bulbs that you have in your home, and that'll reduce mercury exposure. Practice safe disposal though. So if you're trying to get rid of an old bulb or a thermometer, follow any guidelines on Arkansas Department of Health to make sure that you are disposing of it correctly. Number one thing I would suggest is to eat smaller sized fish and limit the amount of seafood intake. I'm not saying get rid of it completely, but I am saying lower the amount you're intaking, because especially like if you're eating a lot of fish daily, especially those big fish, you're exposing yourself to more mercury than the average person. And if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, I would consider talking to my primary care physician about how much fish you can eat. I personally would probably avoid fish, but it is definitely your call. And lastly, replace any mercury containing products. Like I said earlier, mercury is found in batteries, thermometers, cosmetic products, pharmaceuticals, jewelry, paint. Any kind of mercury in your home you need to be aware of and try to reduce that. So lastly, let's go over policies about mercury in Arkansas and worldwide. Let's start with Arkansas first. In 2005, there was the Arkansas Mercury Switch Removal Act, and this was a way for us to remove electric switches which contain mercury from vehicles before they were disposed of. This just helps to lower the amount of mercury in our waters and in our soil. Next, we have a regulation from the Environmental Protection Agency, which was developed in 2016 called the Mercury and Air Toxic Standards in Arkansas. All this is a regulation in regards to power plants and their mercury exposure in the air. This is just a way for us to protect the air quality around nearby neighborhoods. And one of the last ones we have for policies and programs in mercury for Arkansas is the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission and the Arkansas Department of Health. And all this is a way for us to be advised of any ongoing mercury issues. For example, there's one in Northwest Arkansas right now for fish consumption. So it's just a way for us to monitor what we're eating. And lastly, I want to go over a worldwide program that was developed by the United Nations in 2013, and this is the Minamata Convention on Mercury. This is just a way that we as a whole world can monitor and protect ourselves from mercury exposure. So let's wrap this up. Let's remind ourselves what we learned today. Mercury is a natural element, and it's found in the earth, in air, and in water. It's found in our local Mississippi River and in our land. It has some benefits, but the risk of mercury on human health far outweigh the benefits. So we can do some things to be mindful of that. Mercury is neurotoxic. By that I mean it affects our brain and in return affects our whole body. It can have some short-term effects and long-term effects. We have the power to reduce mercury exposure in our lives by practicing safe steps in our home and in what we eat. Lastly, there are some policies set in place by Arkansas and worldwide to reduce mercury exposure and to protect us from any mercury-related events. If you have any questions regarding mercury, please contact the Arkansas Department of Health, or you can look online at our website. I thank you for your time, and I hope that you learned something about mercury and how you can reduce mercury exposure in your life in Phillips County. Thank you. Here are a list of my references. Thank you for your time, and I hope you learned something today.